That title's a bit harsh. I didn't think it was that bad. Until the end. Sonic Lost World, the sort of sequel to Sonic Generations, but also Sonic Colors, but also its own sort of thing, was released for Wii U and 3DS in October 2013 with a PC port released on November 2nd, 2015. And like previous entries with a DS or 3DS release, that version is an entirely separate game co-developed by Dimps, and we are not going to be talking about it today beyond this slight acknowledgement that it does indeed exist. Instead, we're going to be playing the PC port, which is basically just the Wii U version, but without a touchscreen and none of the Nintendo DLC. I do own the Wii U release, but I also played this game in August of 2023, so the DLC wouldn't be available anyway. Besides, I honestly just don't want to plug in my Wii U's HDMI. I'm using that port for my laptop, and messing around behind the TV would just be a hassle. The PC port is probably the most accessible version these days anyways. Even if you're fine with emulating, I mean, it's literally made for PCs, like why not use that one? Lost World was directed by Mario Kishimoto, who previously directed and designed Sonic Colors, and hey, I have an idea. Maybe the series would be more consistent if they didn't switch directors with every fucking entry. The game was written by the same team of Pontac and Graph as Colors and Generations, this time with help from Colors lead planner Harumasa Nakajima, who would later go on to direct all 3 Sonic Boom tie-in games. I'm shocked scriptwriting wasn't his calling. Lost World entered development a little while after Colors was finished and became part of a 3-game partnership with Nintendo that would be released exclusively on Nintendo systems. Considering the other 2 entries were the 4th and worst Mario and Sonic Olympics tie-in and the only competitor for worst Sonic game ever against 06, I think it's safe to call this the best of those 3 exclusives. And it didn't even stay exclusive. Look, there's nothing wrong with being poly, as long as you're open and communicative about it. Apparently, with Generations being the grand celebration of past Sonic entries, Iizuka wanted this game to be something new and different, specifically by revisiting concepts from the scrapped Sonic Extreme and stealing some from Mario Galaxy. This is also the first mainline game since Sonic 3 with no involvement from Jun Senoue, with the soundtrack instead being composed by Tomoya Otani, Takehito Eguchi, and Naofumi Hataya. Although the Invincibility theme is just the Sonic Heroes version and the Speed Up theme is just Reach for the Stars, why exactly I have absolutely no idea. Wow, we already covered the most interesting part of the music, and we haven't even finished the development history section. That's impressive. On release, Lost World received a mixed response. General critical consensus seemed to be the game has its positives and negatives, with the end result being a fairly average game on one side or the other of the median. Commander Sterling thought it had more good than bad, Eurogamer thought it ended up slabby and disjointed, actual words they used, and the fan response was also mixed. Some think it's the worst game in the series, and they're wrong. Others think it's the best game ever, and they're also wrong. Overall, the major fan opinion seems to be that it's just kind of okay. It has some things it does well, and it has some interesting ideas, but it never really finds its footing, and compared to Colors and Generations, just kind of shoots itself in the foot. That is, among people who've actually played the game. I did mention this was originally a Wii U exclusive, remember? This is one of, if not the worst-selling mainline Sonic ever. Based on what data I could find, it's either right below or right above 06 in terms of total sales. While the Wii U's utter failure to sell games definitely contributed to that, it's also very likely that poor word of mouth and misguided advertising played a part in the failure. I mean, so much of the game's promotion relied on the deadly 6 to sell copies. Characters introduced in this game that look shockingly lame. What a fantastic plan to push discs. The game looks... well, it looks like a Sonic game at least. Maybe part of this is down to being made for Wii U, the system wasn't exactly a powerhouse, but the graphical style here is kind of forgettable. So many people have compared Lost World to Mario Galaxy, and for good reason, but I think a better comparison point might be Super Mario 3D Land. The style seems to be leaning hard on the cartoony aesthetic, especially with enemy design. The Badniks look straight up ridiculous at times, all big-eyed and honestly a little lifeless. And of course we can't forget about the brand new antagonists that took the world by storm, the Deadly Six. These delightfully devilish Zeti come in a variety of colors, from the black, red, and cyan of Zavok to the pink, green, and black of Xena, and lest we forget the emo teenager with horns and a tail. Are we sure this wasn't the cartoon tie-in? Yeah, the Zeti don't look that great. The fat yellow one, Zomom, is particularly weak in design and also in animation. The others have fairly decent animation at least, with some actual expression to them. At least in cutscenes. In actual gameplay, not so much. They have voice lines during boss fights and their mouths just don't move. The animation in general is also not incredible. It's not terrible, there is some flair to it, but it kind of feels a bit janky throughout. The in-engine cutscenes are also not amazing. They're fine, the characters are certainly expressive enough, but it's just not anything all that special. At least the pre-rendered cutscenes look really good, even if there are only like 4 total. One at the very beginning showing Sonic and Tails chasing Eggman, 2 showing the planet being drained of energy, and 1 with all the energy going back. Fantastic, great use of the budget, Sega. Hey, give them some slack, we really needed exactly 1 chance to admire Sonic's quills. Sound-wise, well, like I said, I've already discussed the only really memorable part of the soundtrack. It's not bad, the music here is fine, there isn't anything that made me think, oh, this is ear-grating, but there also isn't really anything that great in the soundtrack. The only other thing of note in it is Silent Forest Zone 4, and only because it sounds like a Crash Bandicoot level. And I mean like a Crash 1 level, that sort of faux jungly old-school PS1 kind of song. We do slightly better on the voice acting front, if only because we have recognizable names. The core cast from the last few games returns, and they sound about as good as usual. Amy's voice is kinda weak in my opinion, but she also only shows up in a few scenes, so it's whatever. And we have the Deadly Six and their actors to work with now, and that's fun. Have you ever wanted to hear Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure play a fat yellow punchline? How about Hinata from Naruto playing a character whose entire personality boils down to girl? Oh, and we have 3 Critical Role regulars, including Knuckles' then current voice actor playing, in no particular order, a vaguely offensive emo stereotype, a crazy violent weirdo, and the stoic leader archetype that is somehow both the best and least interesting member of the team. Okay, let's talk about this game's writing. Eggman's kidnapped thousands of animals to turn them into robots! So, a Tuesday then? It turns out, in the skies above Sonic's world, there's a miniature planet which houses a great power which Eggman plans to use in order to take over the world below, by capturing that power in a way that can only be undone by Sonic running through various different themed areas with little cohesion. Oh, my bad, it's a Thursday. In 1993. Sonic and Tails crash in this new land called the Lost Hex, and work to try and rescue the animals Eggman has imprisoned in robots and capsules. Also, the Wisps are there. Somehow. I guess the Hex is closer to space than most of the planet? And the power Eggman has gained control over? None other than the Deadly Six, a set of dangerous Zeti native to the Lost Hex, who can control Eggman's mechs using their power over magnetic fields. It turns out Eggman has enslaved them thanks to the use of a magic conch, which... Wait, is that how it's actually pronounced? Well, regardless, Sonic ends up knocking the magic thingy out of Eggman's hands, sending it off into the world of the IDW comics, leaving the Deadly Six to take control themselves. Only for them to also be evil and end up turning against Eggman and Sonic. So now they're the main antagonists. Go stop them, I guess. Now, a big point of discussion with this game is the Deadly Six, and whether or not they add something to the game. On one hand, it is nice to have new antagonists again after 3 games of just Eggman pulling all the strings, and they do fit in well with the Sonic universe. On the other hand, oh my god, these guys are god-awful. Here's a fun debate to have about Lost World. Which Zeti is the most offensively unfunny of the lot? Obviously Xena's a strong contender, being so one-note and borderline misogynistic. I'm honestly shocked the game hasn't been called out as problematic. Zaz is probably one of the less obnoxious, since he mostly gets his whole crazy and hyperactive gimmick out of the way early and mostly shuts up afterwards, but he's still obnoxious for what little spotlight he gets. Master Zik and Zavik are both clearly intended to be serious, though Zik gets a few groans with the occasional old jokes they pull out, and Zavik for just how clearly Sonic Team thought he was going to be a fan favorite. And of course we have Zor, a complete waste of Sam Riegel's talent and a character that seems designed to get laughs out of being clinically depressed, which is as tone-deaf as that trope always is. But for my money, I'm going to say the worst of the bunch is Zomom, the fat dumbass character whose only joke is, lol, he eats a lot. An archetype that has definitely not been worn down and made tiring over time, because it was never particularly funny to begin with. Well, yes, I have finally crossed the 350-pound mark, how could you guess? The biggest problem with this game's writing is just how poorly it does comedy. They clearly think they're writing some hilarious back and forth, but it's just...
Eggman, you bite!
Yeah, we're about on par with Colors for humor here. Okay, I will give the writers this. Some moments in the plot do kinda work. Not a lot, the artificial conflict between Tails and Sonic is incredibly forced, and I feel like Sonic leans just a little bit too much into the hero making problems for themselves thing, but there are some highlights. Amy's suffering as the energy is pulled from the planet does actually feel appropriately tense. The scene where Eggman gets pissed at the Zeti on an ice screen actually makes him seem pretty intimidating, and while it's another wasted idea like mind-controlled Tails with his colors, I actually think the scene with the fake-out robot Tails was done pretty well and actually seems kinda cool. The writing isn't terrible, there are some good ideas in here, but it's buried under so much fluff and bad attempts at comedy, it just ends up being a chore to get through. There is potential here, I know there is, but it's just not used well. It's kind of a disappointment. But who cares about the writing anyway? This is a video game. We're all about the gameplay here. Hell, the last few games didn't even bother starting off with cutscenes. Clearly, the narrative isn't what makes a Sonic game good or bad. Usually. Instead, we have to look at how the game plays, because this game plays very differently from past entries. And not in a good way. Okay, so, rather than continue with the boost formula that was basically perfected with Sonic Generations, don't at me, Sonic Team decided to go in a different direction with Lost World. Now we have a brand new physics engine and set of controls, which are very poorly explained. Like, shout out to the PC version, which doesn't actually tell you the controls for activating wisps, hints, or your inventory on gamepad. You can change inputs on the options menu, but only for keyboard. Okay, so we have the jump button, the crouch/bounce/kick button, the run button. I'm gonna stop you right there. Why the fuck does Sonic the Hedgehog have a goddamn run button? It's fucking Sonic! His whole thing is going fast! Oh, but if you don't run, you get more precision in where you move. That's what slight tilts are for! The D-pad can't move, Sonic. Your movement is on an analog stick. The only reason to include a run button in this game is because, oh, well, Super Mario 3D Land had a run button. That's also probably the only reason the level clock has been traded out for a time limit on each stage, and instead of getting ranked at the end of each level, we just add our score to an ongoing tally. I mean, it's a Mario game, right? That's what we're developing? What's our team's name again? Oh, and we haven't even gotten into the worst of the Mario aping. I take back what I said in the Colors review. Clearly, this age of Sonic development lasted until 2013. We have a few different moves here, including twists on classic moves. The homing attack has been expanded in weird ways. You can target multiple enemies at once to attack them in rapid succession, or target some enemies multiple times at once to perform a particularly powerful homing attack. Either way, the homing attack feels weird. It's kind of slow, the animation has you arcing up before you hit anything. It feels like the range is tighter than it's supposed to be. We can double jump like in Colors if we aren't close enough to homing attack anything, and that works fine. You can also kick enemies once you've targeted them, which is mostly just an alternate attack you have to use whenever the game decides your homing attack isn't good enough. We can bounce like in Sonic Adventure 2. It's barely ever helpful, but it's there. Oh, and how could I forget the cool new addition to Sonic's abilities, parkour! By which I mean being able to run on straight walls briefly and climb up ledges. Cool. Yeah, the controls are really not great. There are some cool ideas, and I appreciate having the spin dash back in 3D, but in general it's all pretty lackluster. But hey, we also have the wisps, isn't that fun? We have two wisps that can't actually be found in any of the levels, black and gray, which I didn't use once. We have the returning cyan, green, and yellow wisps that play almost exactly as they did in Colors. We also have the orange rocket wisp for the third game in a row, which also for the third game in a row controls completely differently. You now aim it in 3D before launching, and maybe this is heretical, but I think it's actually the best implementation of the orange wisp yet. We also have three brand new wisps we can find. Indigo gives us Indigo Asteroid that can destroy some terrain, Magenta gives Magenta Rhythm, which just bounces you around, and Crimson gives Crimson Eagle, which lets you fly through the air and is also incredibly difficult to grab in most of the levels it appears in. Seriously, it took me until the 5th world to actually grab it, and it first appeared in the 5th level. But overall, the wisps are certainly existent. Yeah, this game doesn't play amazingly. It feels like the game was built not necessarily to be good, but to be different. To change things up, so to speak. And that's admirable to a certain extent, not just doing the same thing over and over again. They just didn't actually do that. The comparison to 3D Land doesn't come from nowhere. It seems like the game is trying to be a classic Sonic translated to 3D, complete with the animal capsules at the end of levels. It's a weird combo of decisions to make, and that's before we get into the level design. Because, wow, does this game's level design vary in quality widely. We have 7 worlds with 4 zones in each, for a total of 28 levels. We start off in Windy Hill, which is one of the most shameless Green Hill clones we've seen yet. We do see the main gimmicks the game is going to throw at us, though, namely cylindrical planets with multiple routes of design on different sides, running through tubes like its Tall Trunk Galaxy, and running around in 2D levels. I'll admit these controls do work alright in 2D, better than most of the Boost games, but it's still not great. In 3D, it's clearly better when you have a bit more space around you to maneuver and multiple routes to take. We also have 2 different boss fights in each of the first 6 worlds. In this case, Zaz tries to attack with a robot moon, and it's not ever particularly fun. Are any of the boss fights? Genuinely. World 2 is Desert Ruins, and it's the first one that really doesn't work. Our first level is a fairly generic desert-themed level, complete with a run-through of pyramids in 2D and avoiding instant-kill enemies that take up a third of the screen. Zone 2 is basically one of the quick-step sections of the Boost games, except we don't have a quick step, so it just feels like complete shit to play through. Why did they think this would actually work? Zone 3 is... okay, that's a decent pun. It's a food-themed level with some decent platforming and a good music track courtesy of Hataya. And then Zone 4 is an auto-scroller and drill test. What the fuck were they even going for with this world? It really doesn't work. And the boss fights against the worst Zeddy of the lot are disappointing. Who'd have guessed? Tropical Coast actually works surprisingly well, and it actually makes me think the game is finally finding its footing. We have giant fruit to work around, a cool double-sided sequence with the drill wisp sending us to the other side of the planets and into the water, a great rail grinding level which really gives you a good trial for bouncing around, and of course shooting through the air with the orange wisp. We also have actually engaging fights against Master Zik, which I appreciate, and the high points continue with World 4, Frozen Factory. This one mixes themes a lot itself, with the main gimmick being that it's a winter level with industry stretching all across it. I enjoy the snowball controls in Zone 2, there's a fun casino pinball level in Zone 3, which is entertaining. There's a pipe maze I got lost in for several minutes in Zone 1, but it's still fun. And of course we have Sonic Ice getting his way through the world, an idea I'm shocked hasn't been in a mainline game before. And I specify mainline because I know some smartass in the comments is gonna be like, actually if you played Sonic Battle 2 for the Nintendo DSi, you'd know. Shut the fuck up. I'm just kidding. I know it debuted in Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympics. Next after the Ice World, we have the Jungle World, Silent Forest, and wow, this is the definition of a quality drop. We have enemies that appear by surprise, obstacles that seem to work at random, hazards the game doesn't actually explain to you, a fucking stealth mission is Sonic the goddamn Hedgehog physics that do not work, sections where you can't use the homing attack, why the fuck did they think this would work? And again, why is Zone 4's music just a Crash Bandicoot track? Sky Road, meanwhile, has very little identity of its own. Zone 2 is the only one that looks like it wasn't taken from another world, and even then it's just a bad 2D platforming sequence. Zone 1 feels like it's just rehashing Windy Hill again, Zone 3 is literally just another version of an optional zone from Tropical Coast, and Zone 4 is a full return to Desert Ruins because why not ruin everything? And then the final world, Lava Mountain, sucks. Wish I could say more, but that's all I wrote. I can bullshit something. Why is Zone 2 underwater? This is just a rehash of Tropical Coast. Oh my fucking god, would it have killed them to add a checkpoint to Zone 1? Why is the giant Zavix fight the only fight in the game to take more than a few hits to kill? This final boss is pathetic. And that's Sonic Lost World. Yes, we've hit back on the Sonic ending syndrome, though to be fair in this case it's more just two areas in a bad game that weren't quite as bad as the rest of it. Sonic Lost World isn't the worst in the series. It has its positives, things that could potentially be really interesting in another context, but it's all buried under hundreds of problems, ranging from minor nitpicks to major roadblocks. Even rescuing animals, what should be a fun throwback to the classic games, ends up as a frustrating requirement to access certain zones. I don't hate Lost World, I really don't, but after this, I'm pretty happy never playing it again. Which sucks considering there's a secret world 8 I'm never gonna fucking touch.